All right, folks, this is Nate. This is the 80/20 drummer. Welcome to the first virtual drum clinic, which I like to call an AMA or an Ask Me Anything. So for those of you who are new to the channel, usually I do lessons on how to play jazz or how to play rhythmic subdivisions or how to play brushes or how to play like this or that drummer. But I decided to do something different this week. So I sent out an email to my lists and I asked if anyone had any questions. I wanted to practice this clinic format. Like, what would I do if I needed to give a guitar center clinic? So in the intro, I recorded a completely uncut take of me just performing as I would to open up a masterclass. Okay, so I got a lot of the same type of question and I grouped them together by category. So here goes. So Demetrius asks, how can I practice comping or soloing in the form without having to count the bars? And John asks, how do you practice developing a solo over a form, possibly over multiple choruses? So there are two separate questions there. One is how do you play a solo? The other is how do you play over a form? So let's take them in reverse order. So playing over a form is simple as long as you count in your head. But we don't want to count in our head. We want to have playing over the form be instinctive. The thing that all the oldsters will tell you, the cliche, is always be able to sing the melody. But I think that's a great place to start. Let me try a little demo here. Ba-da-da, ba-da-ba, da-da-da, ba-da, ba-da, ba-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da, ba-da, ba-da, ba, ba-ba-da, ba-da-ba-ba-ba. Ba 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 da da ba ba da ba ba da ba 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 da ba 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 da ba da ba da ba ba da da ba da ba da ba da 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 ba da ba 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 da ba 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 da ba da ba ba da. So that, of course, was Benny Golson's great tune, Stablemates. And it's a great one to practice because it's sort of the jam session killer. And if you try to count it, if you try to think of it in terms of symmetry, it's not going to work out super well. So it's one you have to feel instinctive. So number one is learn the melody. Play that recording over and over and over again until you can sing along with the melody or at least feel where the bass line goes. And number two is something I'm going to be talking about in a future lesson, which is go into GarageBand or Logic, drag the track of a couple choruses of the tune, whether it's Abersold, whether it's from the original, it doesn't matter, you're not going to be publishing it, so there's no copyright issue. Make another track and record yourself just playing like I did, a click. So here's the kicker. You're going to make loops of that tune. And first and foremost, you're going to play over the complete tune. But then you're going to take your cursor and you're going to remove chunks of it. So you're going to have the first day section and the last day section, but you're going to take the B section out. So you hear ba ba da ba da ba ba da, and then it'll just go, right? And then you need to come back in with the tune. So you start there, then remove two A sections. So you start with the first day, the recording plays, and then you remove the B section, you remove the final A section, so you're only playing with click. Then you practice subtractively, and at every point, you're forcing yourself to remember this form of the tune in your head, and you're using the track only as a check, so it'll let you know if you're off. And of course, you have the click there because we're not asking you to guess exactly where Benny Golson put a tempo 50 years ago. Okay, how to solo. Is this ever a rabbit hole? There are two sides to this. Number one is rudimental competency. So that's things like that type of stuff. And the answer to that is get the 80/20 roadmap or get my course. Or check out a lot of great other people's resources. Figure out something where you're practicing real world rudimental competency. But the mistake a lot of people make is they don't ground it in real world, and then they never practice actual improvisation. So I'm going to link from here back to the How to Play Like Mark Juliana Part 2 lesson, because that's where I really break down how to solo. But basically, you want to challenge yourself in a few ways. So you want to say, okay, I'm going to give myself 4/4, and I can only use kick, snare, and hi-hats, no rim shots. So 3/4. Right, then you can escalate. I can add rim shots. I can add floor tom. You can change the meter. You can give yourself different challenges. Oh, subdivisions. I can only do eighth notes. I can do quarters, eighths, and triplets. I can do quarters, eighths, triplets, and sixteenths. By the way, we're going to talk about this later on, but where do you put the metronome? You put it on the common denominators. Okay. It's pretty clear to me. I'm not going to get to all the questions I had planned today. Let's move on. Number 2 is, can you learn to be good, or are you born with it? So Jack writes, and I paraphrase, how do people like Chris Dave and Juliana actually play like that? And Stephen wrote a really great post in which he brought up the fantastic Ginger Baker documentary on Netflix. But essentially he says, can you test how good your time is? Can you improve it? If you're playing with a big band and they decide to speed up or slow down, what do you do? One of the biggest things is, I'll hear from people who say that they thought they could learn how to play the drums, but then somebody told them you're either born with it or you're not, and that completely defeated them. So let me do the Asian math student thought experiment, which is that in the US there's a canard a lot that, oh, I wasn't born with the math gene. Is math aptitude something you're born with? And the counter I can come back with is South Korea, China, Japan, Taiwan have basically been dominating everybody else in terms of math scores on standardized tests. So if math wasn't teachable, how does this entire region of the world manage to educate practically all of its citizens to be better at math than all but the most elite of other students? And by the way, if you think it's a race thing, think about the Swedes. The Swedes are also killing us. So it's not a race thing, it's an education thing. The exception to this is athletic aptitude, right? Like, are you born with a body for basketball? Are you born with a body for the NFL? But music, in my belief, and all you need to do is look at the spectrum of different physiques drummers have, is much more a brain science than it is a physically limited thing like ballet dancing or the NFL. So scientifically, you can learn to be better at the drums. Okay, so number 2, what do you do if you're playing time and the band sucks at time? Which is that you don't beat yourself up, because it takes a long fucking time to learn to play with good time. I hear people talk about this all the time, but they'll say, yeah, this cat I was playing with kept dragging. It was such a drag, there was negative vibe during the set break. And I want to just say, dude, like, does it matter? Just be nice to people. Yeah, somebody's dragging, they're not going to take your tempo. It's your job to gently suggest the correct tempo, and then at the end of the day to make everybody happy. And I will say, super secure players like my former teacher John can go into situations like that and make everybody happy and use the subtle powers of persuasion to influence the time to be better without being bullies about it. And I think the people who are bullies about it are the people who are insecure. If you're secure about your time, then just be nice to other people and help them have a good time. How did Juliana, Matt Garska, Marcus Gilmore, and others do it? Arthur Cam is another one. The thing you realize when you get around these people is that they are practice fanatics. They are mad scientists at the art of making themselves better. They're not trying to be American Idol stars. They just have a love of music and of the drums that goes so deep that they're just obsessed with it. And that's what I'm trying to channel. And that's why I'm sort of self-experimenting to demonstrate to you guys that it's possible. Okay, moving on. What styles do you need to study? So Tim, shout outs, Tim, great player, former student. He asks, where do you think the appropriate line is between innovating on the instrument and paying respect to where the instrument came from? And Ruben asks, of all the styles and genres that you've learned throughout your years of honing the craft, which style has impacted you most as a musician? Oh, and let me add one more from my current coaching client, David. Shoutouts, David. Using traditional grip, how do I develop finger control? I'm looking for speed and accuracy. Wants to do rim shots. So on the surface of things, these may all seem like slightly different questions, but it gets back to, what is your obligation to learn on the drum kit? Like, Tim seems to hint that people have an obligation to study the tradition. By the way, Tim, great player and somebody who studies a lot of the tradition because he loves it and because he sees the impact it has on its playing. So study the tradition not because you have to, but because it'll give you a competitive advantage. Believe me, you don't have to force yourself to love things. Like, check out Clyde Stubblefield, check out Elvin Jones. You're not going to be doing a lot of work for that stuff to have an influence on you. So for the traditional grip question, I will definitely do a lesson on traditional grip. But the thing I want to talk about with respect to traditional grip versus match grip is, what purpose is that serving for you? So you may have noticed that in my jazz videos, I play traditional grip. And in my non-jazz videos, anytime I'm playing the big kit, I play match grip. And that's because if I'm playing loudly and I'm playing rim shots, it's the least work, the least wear and tear on my body to play match grip. And by the way, all of my favorite players switch, whether it's Marcus Gilmore, Justin Brown, Eric Harland, Kendrick Scott. They're all equally conversant at matched and traditional, and they use each for a different thing. The reason I use traditional when I play jazz is because it feels different. I feel like it activates a little bit different side of my nervous system, a different muscle memory. Really quick crash course for David. I think that, the fulcrum is between the thumb and the pad of the index finger. You're resting on the last digit of the ring finger in the left hand, and then traditionally you want to have the thumb joining the index finger between these two knuckles. And beyond that, what I'll say is that 98% of your leverage comes from the fulcrum between your thumb and your index finger. So a lot of this finger control thing, and I've heard people say you're supposed to bounce it between these two fingers. I think that's cause-effect reversal. I think if you just practice the same rudiments with that basic structure in mind, you'll find a comfort level with it. How should you play the pedal? So Milios writes, I'm now getting into the faster single pedal work, and I notice I'm having some trouble with my doubles on the pedal, etc., etc. So he tried heel up. It wasn't working super well. Now he's trying heel toe, which is a horrendous idea. Actually, JoJo makes it work for him. Listen, John Riley said, if it's working for you, do it. If it's not, and I feel I can suggest a more efficient way, I will. So JoJo made the heel toe work really well. Virgil Donati, a few of these other cats. Cat's badder than I'll ever be. So I'm not going to impugn that. I'm just saying the shortest route is heel up. And Matt writes, Nate, I'm currently working on altering my right foot technique to play out of the bass drum. And he talks about Keith Carlock, Mark Juliana, Jojo Mayer again, some of our favorites. So the only thing I'll say, let me improvise a quick drill for you here. First and foremost, you definitely want to be practicing heel up if you're starting from scratch. And the reason why is it's the most versatile. Because in a lot of real situations, you're not going to be able to control your distance from the kit. And heel up allows you to sit right up on the bass drum. So if you're in a pit situation, it also puts you closer to your cymbals and your toms, so you're not reaching. It's better for posture. If you're up on your toes, you're able to keep it better. There are a bunch of reasons it's better. If you're having trouble with the doubles, just practice it. And by the way, a good way to practice that is the 80-20 roadmap. More on that later, but let me show you something roadmap-ish that I would practice for that. Of course, you can get into other stuff, and the roadmap goes through all of it. The coaching course goes even deeper. But that's your basic. And you notice I am practicing the coordination aspect between the hands and the foot, just because why would you practice something in isolation that you're never going to use in isolation? But the key to the bass drum is not playing it fast unless you're playing double pedals. The key is putting it in the right place. So if you're playing at a super fast tempo and you don't have the chops to articulate it that quickly, just don't try to play doubles that quickly, but wait for that to improve. Eventually it will. So playing off the drum, playing into the drum, I would do a drill like this. You see what I'm doing? Again, I'm combining it with the coordination. That's something that's called the skip note exercise. That's in the roadmap in the coaching course. But I was watching Keith Carlock videos all day. He still plays heel up, but he's able to differentiate between putting the beater into the drum and playing off. And by the way, that only really matters if you tune your bass drum high and open like Keith does, like I do for jazz, like Greg Hutchinson and Clarence Penn do. Clarence, shout outs. Call me. So bass drum, let us move on. Okay, now we get deep. Background success ingredients. Alexander writes, I'm curious as to your background and how you got to where you're at today. Maybe you could share your opinions on what you think is necessary to become a successful jazz drummer, etc. Dustin writes, over how long a period of time did this concept take to develop? Were there any other teachers or resources you used to develop your 80-20 style? And someone who didn't write his name, he only wrote his email address. So we're going to call him Yerevangel, which I think is probably an anagram, but that's what you get for not filling out the name field. Writes, my question is, what was the most valuable thing you learned studying with John Riley? So common theme. What was my background? What do I think is necessary to be successful? How did I develop my 80-20 concept? So my background is I played drums and mailed it in for most of my life. Got to MSM when I was 21, 22 years old. Absolutely sucked. John saw somebody maybe with potential, if he could light a fire under me and inspire me. Most important thing I learned from John was definitely talent is less important than discipline, work ethic, and practicing smart. And what advice do I have for a young jazz drummer? So now we're going to talk a little bit more about the 80-20 ethos, because obviously a big inspiration for 80-20 was my teacher John, Ed Soph, some of the other great instructional materials out there. But I also drew a lot of inspiration from the business space, from thinkers like Seth Godin and Tim Ferriss. And that's important because I want to lead into the next thing, which is how do you succeed as a jazz drummer? And we want to be very careful to divide success into its component parts. One part is how do you get as balling as possible? How do you become the best musician possible? The way you do that is to, number one, move to a scene where you can surround yourself with people better than you so that playing at a high level becomes the norm. If you can find a good teacher. If not, that's why I created my materials, why a lot of other teachers created their materials. Number two is become a mad scientist of the drums, the way Marcus Gilmore is, or Bill Stewart is, or Justin Brown is, or Keith Carlock or Nate Wood. Any of these people, you just have to want to get as good as possible for the sheer love of the instrument, because there's no external arbiter of success. There's no whiplash scenario anymore where you're going to get chosen by a band that's going to be your employer. If you want to be Justin Brown, Eric Harland, Marcus Gilmore, you want to be an artist, you want to do your thing, you're going to need to support yourself. The way I recommend doing that is you're probably going to need a secondary skill while you're ramping up. And it can be anything from web design to search engine optimization. It's not super difficult, but I want to recommend a resource, and that is the Tropical MBA podcast. The worst thing to do is to move to an expensive city and get yourself into a day job situation that doesn't leave you any time to develop as an artist. You want to set up a context where your living expenses are low, where you're constantly surrounding yourself with your heroes. You have time to shed, you have time to develop your own thing. And the final stage is get in a band. And your bands will change over the years, but you want to get in a group with like-minded folks who are at or above your talent level so that you can actually make music with them. And you should take responsibility for starting that. You should not wait to be picked. Okay, guys, just want to thank you one more time for sending in such great questions. Sincerely sorry if I didn't get to your question. Again, we'll definitely have to do a round 2 for this. A lot of these questions gave me great ideas for future lessons, so if I didn't get to you here, maybe look for the answer to your question in a future lesson. Anyway, it's been real. Remember, please check out the roadmap, which I've been hawking all lesson long, but really for all this rudimental stuff, if you just want to have a solid base, check it out. I'm going to leave you now by playing a little bit more for you. And this is pursuant to a question I received about subdivision, which was, when I practice all the subdivision stuff with the metronome in crazy places, am I thinking in that way when I play music, or is it just a means to an end to forget about it? And it's absolutely the latter. It's just a means to forget about it. I am not thinking metronome on 16 offbeats when I play music. I'm trying to think in shapes and just hear phrases when they appear and follow them. And the reason you practice the facility is when that muse comes, you want to hang on for as long as you can. And the reason we practice the form stuff is if you have to let go, you want to know you're going to be in the right place and you want to be able to get back on. So anyway, I'll leave you with this. It's been real. We'll do another one soon. Nate from the 80/20 Drummer. One love.